Hello everyone. Welcome to Story Hub channel. Discover real stories of wife betrayals, shocking twists and turns and their secrets. Hit the subscribe button and get to our story. It was just another Wednesday evening. Nothing out of the ordinary. I had come home after a long, grueling day at work, feeling worn out and eager to relax. All I wanted was to heat up the leftovers that Amy had made, crack open a cold beer, and catch an episode of Chicago Fire. But the second I stepped through the door, I knew something was off. "Honey, I'm in the living room. Can you come here and sit down? We need to talk," Amy called out, her voice carrying a seriousness that made my stomach tighten. I let out a heavy sigh as a sense of dread crept over me. "I'm coming, sweetheart," I responded, doing my best to keep my voice steady. As I made my way to the living room, I spotted Amy sitting nervously on the couch, a half-empty bottle of California red wine on the table in front of her. Her hands were slightly shaky as she poured herself another glass. I sank into my usual chair, feeling the exhaustion of the day settling into my bones. "What's going on, Amy?" I asked, trying to keep my composure. She took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eye. "I won't beat around the bush. I've been a loyal wife to you and a dedicated mother to our kids for as long as I can remember. Now that they're grown and out on their own, I feel like my duties here are done." I nodded slowly, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "I understand. You've always been there for us," I acknowledged. She continued, taking another sip of her wine. "As you know, I didn't have any romantic experiences before we got married." I let out a nervous chuckle, trying to lighten the mood. "Same here," I said, but she didn't even crack a smile and carried on. "This weekend I'm going away with a friend." My heart started pounding. "Who is it?" I asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. "If you really need to know, it's Grant Williamson, your boss." I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. "I think our son's older than he is," I said, disbelief and frustration rising within me. "Don't be ridiculous. He's 30, give me some credit. Besides, I want to see what it's like to be with other men. I know you care about me, and you'll let me do this. After it's done, I'll make things right with you, and we can move forward. Think this through, Amy. If you go ahead with this, our marriage is over," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "Stop being so melodramatic. You wouldn't end our marriage over something so trivial. Besides, divorce would be too expensive," she shot back, rolling her eyes. "That might be true, but I'm not staying married to a cheating wife," I replied, feeling my anger start to boil over. "Grant's picking me up on Friday evening. I expect you to be polite to him. He's a bit nervous about it, so seeing you're okay with everything will probably help calm him down," she insisted. "You really think I'm going to play host to your boyfriend while you get ready to spend the weekend with him?" I asked, completely floored. "Yes, that's exactly what I expect," she finished, draining her glass. The room fell into a heavy silence. I was flooded with a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, shock. I stared at Amy, the woman I'd loved for so many years, and it felt like I was looking at a stranger. This revelation had shattered my world, and I knew things would never be the same. The days leading up to Friday felt like walking a tightrope, every step precarious and uncertain. The tension in the house was thick, almost tangible, as if the very walls were anticipating the inevitable clash. Siri and I stuck to our usual routines, barely speaking, and when we did, each word was chosen carefully, like handling something fragile that could shatter at any moment. On Thursday evening, I was half-heartedly washing dishes when Amy walked into the kitchen and started making a grocery list. "Do we need more milk?" she asked, her voice neutral, almost robotic. "Yeah, we're running low," I replied, trying to mirror her detached tone. "And grab some bread while you're at it." We went on like that, ticking off the list, carefully avoiding any real conversation. The unspoken tension between us felt like a coiled spring ready to snap. That night, as we got ready for bed, Amy broke the silence. "Are you really going to make this difficult?" I turned to her, feeling a mix of sadness and frustration. "I just don't get how you can act so casual about all this. Do you even care about what this is doing to us?" She sighed, clearly irritated. "I've already told you why I need this. Can't you just accept it? And what about us? What about our marriage? I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. Can we not do this right now? I'm tired, she said, turning her back to me. I watched her climb into bed, feeling more alone than ever. I couldn't bear the thought of lying next to her, so I decided to sleep in the office that night. The fold-out bed was lumpy and uncomfortable, but it was better than being near her. Friday came way too fast. I spent the day at work in a fog, barely able to concentrate. My coworkers noticed I was out of it, but I brushed off their concerns with a forced smile and a vague excuse about being tired. When I got home, the tension in the air was suffocating. Amy was busy with last-minute preparations, her suitcase packed and sitting by the door. I avoided her, retreating to the office to escape the unbearable strain. At exactly 7:00 p.m., the doorbell rang. Its new chime, a haunting tune, echoing through the house. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was walking toward my own execution. "Amy, what was that sound?" I called out, trying to keep my voice even. "It's the doorbell, honey. I changed the tune," she answered from the bedroom. "What's that melody? It sounds so familiar," I murmured, mostly to myself. "It's called L," she replied casually. "I don't like it. Please change it later. Now let Grant in. I need another 15 minutes to finish getting ready. Offer him a drink. He's fond of bourbon." "Sure thing, sweetheart," I said, the sarcasm in my voice almost imperceptible. I opened the door to find Grant standing there with a self-satisfied grin plastered on his face. It took everything I had not to punch him right then and there. Instead, I forced a smile. "Grant, come on in," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "Thanks, I appreciate it," he said, glancing around the house with a curious look. "Would you like a drink?" "We've got bourbon," I offered, my voice tight. "That'd be great," he replied, making himself comfortable on the couch as if he owned the place. I poured him a glass, watching his every move with growing disgust. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, Amy appeared from the bedroom, dressed to kill and looking stunning. "Grant, you're here. Sorry to keep you waiting," she said, planting a kiss on his cheek. "No problem, Amy. Thanks for the drink," Grant said, raising his glass in my direction. I managed to force a smile, even though a storm was raging inside me. The calm before the inevitable clash was almost over, and I knew that whatever peace we had left was about to be shattered, leaving only chaos behind. Friday night had finally arrived, and the tension in the house was suffocating. I sat in the living room, my eyes fixed on the clock, as each tick seemed to echo like a drumbeat in my head. Amy was still in the bedroom, putting the final touches on her appearance. The doorbell's eerie chime broke the silence, signaling Grant's arrival. I took a deep breath and made my way to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. When I opened it, I was greeted by Grant's self-satisfied grin. It took every ounce of self-control not to knock that grin off his face right then and there. "Grant, come on in," I said, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Thanks. I appreciate this," he replied as he stepped inside. I led him into the living room and offered him a seat. "Would you like a drink? We've got bourbon." "That sounds perfect, thanks," Grant said, settling himself comfortably on the sofa. I poured him a glass, the tension in the room so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Here you go," I said, handing him the drink. "Cheers," he said, raising his glass. "Cheers," I echoed, my voice strained. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity, as we sat in silence, the only sound the relentless ticking of the clock. Finally, Amy emerged from the bedroom, looking stunning and ready for her weekend away. "Grant, you're here. Sorry for keeping you waiting," she said, kissing him on the cheek. "No problem, Amy. Thanks for the drink," he said, raising his glass to me once more. I nodded, feeling my stomach twist. Seeing them together, so comfortable and familiar with each other, was almost more than I could stand. "Well, I guess I'll leave you two to it," I said, standing up. But as I walked toward the door, something inside me snapped. I spun around to face Grant, my anger boiling over. "You've got some nerve coming here, Grant," I said, my voice shaking with rage. Grant looked startled. Save it, I cut him off, stepping closer. You waltz into my home, drink my bourbon, and think it's fine to take my wife away for the weekend? You must be out of your mind. Please don't make a scene. A scene? You think this is a scene? I laughed bitterly. You haven't seen anything yet. Without another word, I let all my anger and frustration out in a violent kick to Grant's groin. He doubled over in agony, his glass shattering on the floor as he crumpled forward. I followed up with a punch to his jaw, sending him sprawling onto the porch. He lay there unconscious, a mix of blood and vomit pooling around him. I stood over him, my chest heaving as the red haze of anger began to clear. I looked at Amy, who stood frozen in shock. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind me. I locked it, turning the key twice, and leaned against the door, trying to steady my breathing. "Amy, you might want to check outside," I called out loudly through the closed door. "There's someone out there with some information for you." A few moments later, I heard a voice outside. "Ms. Larson, you've been served." There was a thud behind the door, and I knew Amy had collapsed. The weight of what had just happened hit me like a ton of bricks. I stood there, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The confrontation was over, but the fallout had just begun. As I made my way back to the living room, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same again. The storm had hit, and now it was time to figure out how to pick up the pieces and move forward. The morning after the confrontation, the house felt unsettlingly quiet. I woke up on the pull-out bed in the office, the uncomfortable mattress doing little to ease the ache in my back or the turmoil in my mind. The events of the previous night kept replaying in my head. I couldn't shake the image of Grant lying unconscious on the porch or the shocked expression on Amy's face. I headed to the kitchen, hoping that a strong cup of coffee might help clear my head. As I poured myself a mug, the front door creaked open. Amy walked in, her eyes red from crying, her clothes rumpled and disheveled. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely audible. I set down my coffee and turned to face her. "There's nothing left to discuss, Amy. You made your choice." "I never thought things would go this far," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "Well, they did," I replied, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "You brought Grant into our home and expected me to just go along with it. What did you think was going to happen?" "I don't know what I was thinking," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I just needed something different, something new." "And what about us? What about our marriage?" I asked, my frustration seeping through. "I thought we could get through this, that it wouldn't mean the end," she said, staring down at the floor. I shook my head as the reality of the situation sank in. "Amy, you broke my trust. Our marriage can't survive that." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you." "I know," I said softly. "But sorry isn't enough to fix what's broken." We stood there in silence, the weight of our words hanging heavily in the air. Finally, Amy broke the stillness. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I think it's best if you leave," I said, my voice firm. "We need some time apart to figure things out." She nodded, wiping away her tears. "I understand. I'll pack my things." As she turned to go, I felt a pang of sadness. Despite everything, a part of me still cared for her. But deep down, I knew this was the right decision. The days that followed were a blur. Amy packed her belongings and moved out, leaving the house feeling even more empty than before. I threw myself into work, trying to keep my mind occupied. Friends and family reached out, offering their support and comforting words, but I found it hard to talk about what had happened. One evening, about a week after Amy had left, my friend Dave came over. We sat on the porch, sipping beers and talking about everything except my marriage. "You've been through a lot," Dave said, breaking the silence. How are you holding up? I shrugged and took a long sip of my beer. Some days are better than others. It's just hard to wrap my head around the fact that this is my life now. I get that, he replied. But you're tough. You'll get through this. Thanks, Dave, I said, genuinely appreciative of his support. It's just going to take some time. As the sun set, we sat in a comfortable silence, the shared understanding between us more comforting than any words could have been. I knew that the road ahead was going to be tough, but I also knew I wasn't alone. In the weeks that followed, I started to establish a new routine. I redecorated the house, making it feel more like my own space. I reconnected with old friends and picked up some new hobbies, slowly beginning to piece my life back together. One day, as I was strolling through the park, I unexpectedly bumped into an old colleague, Emma. We started chatting, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself genuinely smiling. "It's really nice to see you," she said, her eyes sparkling with warmth. "How have you been holding up?" "I'm getting there," I replied truthfully. "Just taking things one day at a time." "Why don't we grab coffee sometime?" she suggested. "It'd be great to catch up properly." "I'd like that," I said, feeling a small flicker of hope for the future. The aftermath of the confrontation had been tough and messy, but it also signaled the start of a new chapter in my life. As I walked home, I realized I was ready to face whatever came next, bolstered by the support of friends and the strength I'd found within myself. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting a soft glow on the room as I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee growing cold while I stared at the stack of papers in front of me. The legal documents that marked the end of my marriage to Amy felt surreal, as if the past few weeks had been a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I knew this was the right step. Our marriage had been broken beyond repair, and the confrontation with Grant had been the final blow. But knowing it was the right decision didn't make it any easier. As I took a sip of my coffee, the doorbell rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I opened the door to find a man in a suit standing there, holding a folder. "Mr. Walker?" he asked, his expression professional and unreadable. "Yes, that's me," I replied, my heart sinking. "I'm here to serve you these papers," he said, handing me the folder. "Please sign here to acknowledge receipt." I took the folder and signed where he indicated. As I closed the door, the weight of the documents felt heavy in my hands, pressing down on me. Amy arrived shortly after, looking sad and resigned. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the documents lying between us. "So this is it," she said quietly, her voice filled with regret. "Yeah, this is it," I replied, my voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I want you to know I never wanted things to end like this," she said, her eyes pleading with me. "I know, but it did, and now we have to face it," I said, not wanting to drag out the conversation. She nodded, wiping away a tear. "I'm sorry for everything. I truly am." "I'm sorry too, Amy, but we need to move forward," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. We went through the documents, each signature feeling like another step away from the life we once shared. It was a strange mix of relief and sorrow, the finality of it all sinking in. After we finished, Amy stood up, clutching her copy of the papers. "I guess this is goodbye then," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, I guess it is," I replied, standing up as well. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and hugged me. It was a brief, awkward embrace, but it carried a weight of unspoken words and unresolved feelings. "Take care," she said, pulling away. "You too, Amy," I replied, watching as she walked out the door. I stood there for a moment, the house feeling emptier than ever. The legal proceedings were finalized, and there was no turning back. It was time to start a new chapter, even if I wasn't entirely sure what that would look like. As the days passed, I focused on the practicalities of moving on. I contacted a lawyer, sorted through our finances, and started making plans for the future. It was a slow, painful process, but each step felt like a small victory. One evening, I decided to call my sister, Linda, who had been my rock through all of this. I needed her advice and her comforting words. "Hey," Linda said as she answered. "Got a minute to chat?" Of course. How are you holding up? She asked, her voice filled with concern. Honestly, it's been rough, I admitted, but I'm managing. I'm glad to hear that. You're stronger than you realize, she said, her words bringing me some comfort. Thanks, Linda. I really needed to hear that, I replied, feeling a bit lighter. We talked for a while, and her familiar voice and practical advice helped ease some of the burden I'd been carrying. By the time we hung up, I felt a renewed sense of determination. The next day, I met with my lawyer to finalize some details. As we reviewed the documents, I couldn't help but think about what lay ahead. It was daunting, but it also held new possibilities. You're making the right choices here, my lawyer said reassuringly. This is the beginning of a fresh start. I know. It's just hard to see it that way right now, I replied honestly. Give it time. Things will improve, he said with a kind smile. As I left his office, I took a deep breath, feeling a small glimmer of hope. The legal process had been difficult, but it was also a necessary step toward healing. I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that each day would bring me closer to the new life I was beginning to build. The first few weeks after Amy moved out were the hardest. The house felt strange and empty without her. I found myself wandering through the rooms, memories flooding back with every step. But life had to go on, and I knew I needed to find a way to move forward. I started by making small changes around the house. I repainted the living room a calming shade of blue, a color that felt like a fresh start. I rearranged the furniture, creating a space that felt more like my own. It was therapeutic, a way to reclaim my environment and make it reflect the new chapter of my life. One Saturday morning, I decided to tackle the backyard, which had been neglected for far too long. As I pulled weeds and trimmed bushes, I felt a sense of accomplishment. The physical work was a welcome distraction, and gave me a sense of control in a time that felt overwhelmingly chaotic. While I was working, my neighbor, Mr. Anderson, walked over. He was an older man, always kind and friendly. "Morning. The yard's looking good," he said, leaning on the fence. "Thanks, Mr. Anderson. It's a work in progress," I replied, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "Yeah, I can see that. Say, why don't you come over for dinner tonight? My wife's making her famous lasagna," he offered with a warm smile. "I'd like that." "Thanks, Mr. Anderson," I said, feeling genuinely grateful for the invitation. Dinner at the Andersons was just what I needed. Their home was filled with laughter and warmth, a stark contrast to the emptiness I had been feeling. We talked about everything and nothing, and the easy conversation was a balm to my weary soul. "How are you really doing?" Mrs. Anderson asked gently as we sat around the dinner table. "It's been tough," I admitted, "but I'm trying to take it one day at a time." "You're doing great. It's okay to take it slow," she said kindly. Their support was invaluable, and it reminded me that I wasn't alone. There were people who cared about me and were willing to lend a hand when I needed it most. As the weeks turned into months, I began to find new routines and rediscovered old passions. I started going to the gym again, something I had neglected during the turmoil of my marriage. The physical exertion was a release, a way to channel my emotions into something positive. One evening at the gym, I bumped into an old friend, Mike. We hadn't seen each other in years, but it was like no time had passed at all. "Hey, it's been forever. How have you been?" Mike asked, his face lighting up with a grin. "Hey, Mike. Well, it's been a rough patch, but I'm getting through it," I replied honestly. "Yeah, I heard about everything. I'm really sorry, man. But listen, if you ever want to hang out or just need someone to talk to, I'm here," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate that," I said, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over me. We started meeting up regularly, grabbing coffee or catching a movie now and then. It felt good to reconnect, to have someone who understood and could offer a break from the weight of my thoughts. One afternoon, as we sat in a cafe, Mike brought up an idea. "Hey, have you ever thought about trying something new? Like picking up a new hobby or taking a class?" he suggested. "I'm not sure." "What do you have in mind?" I asked, intrigued. "There's this cooking class I've been thinking about. It might be fun and a good way to meet new people, he said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. You know what? That actually sounds like a great idea, I said, feeling a spark of excitement I hadn't felt in a while. The cooking class turned out to be a fantastic decision. It brought together people from all walks of life, each with their own reasons for being there. We laughed, learned, and shared stories over simmering pots and chopping boards. One evening, as we were cleaning up after class, I found myself chatting with Emma, a fellow classmate. "You've got a real talent for this," she said, nodding toward the pasta I had just made. "Thanks, Emma. I'm really enjoying it," I replied with a smile. "Me too. It's nice to try something different, isn't it?" she said, her eyes twinkling with a mix of joy and curiosity. "Yeah, it really is," I agreed, feeling a genuine connection. As I walked home that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. Moving on wasn't easy, but with the support of friends, both old and new, and the courage to embrace new experiences, I was starting to see a brighter future. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. I was finding my way, one step at a time, and that was enough. Months had passed since Amy left, and life had started to settle into a new rhythm. The house, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now felt like a sanctuary. I had repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and filled the space with things that brought me joy. It finally felt like my own place, a reflection of the new chapter in my life. One sunny Saturday morning, I decided to visit the farmer's market downtown. It was something Amy and I used to do together, but this time I went alone, ready to create new memories. As I wandered through the stalls, the vibrant colors and lively atmosphere lifted my spirits. I picked up some fresh vegetables, a loaf of artisan bread, and a jar of homemade jam. It felt good to indulge in these small pleasures. "Hey, is that you?" a familiar voice called out. I turned around to see Emma, my friend from cooking class, smiling warmly at me. "Emma, what a pleasant surprise." "How are you?" I replied, genuinely happy to see her. "I'm great, just picking up some fresh produce for the week. How about you?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with that same enthusiasm I remembered from class. "Same here. It's a perfect day for it," I said, holding up my bag of goodies with a smile. "Hey, why don't we grab a coffee and catch up?" Emma suggested. "Sounds perfect," I agreed. We found a cozy cafe nearby and settled into a corner table. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and the gentle hum of conversations around us created a comforting atmosphere. "So, how have you really been?" Emma asked, her expression sincere. "I've been doing well. It's been a journey, but I'm finding my way," I replied honestly. "I'm glad to hear that. You seem lighter and more at peace," she said, looking directly into my eyes. "I think I am. It's taken time, but I'm finally starting to see the positives in this new beginning," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Emma smiled warmly. "That's wonderful. You deserve happiness." "Thank you, Emma. That means a lot," I said, feeling a warmth spread through me that I hadn't felt in a long time. As we chatted, I realized how much I enjoyed her company. She was kind, understanding, and had a way of making me feel completely at ease. When we finally parted ways, I left with a sense of anticipation for what the future might hold. Back at home, I decided to try out a new recipe from our cooking class. The kitchen, once filled with shared memories, was now becoming a place where I could create new ones. I chopped vegetables, simmered sauces, and lost myself in the process. Later that evening, as I sat down to enjoy the homemade meal, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, filled with the promise of new beginnings. The following week, I received a call from my lawyer. "Hi, I just wanted to let you know that everything is finalized. The divorce is official," he said. "Thanks for letting me know," I replied, feeling a mix of emotions wash over me. "How are you feeling about it?" he asked, his tone filled with concern. "I'm okay. Honestly, it's a relief. I'm ready to move on," I said, realizing it was the truth. "That's good to hear. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out," he said. "I appreciate that." "Thanks for everything," I said before hanging up. I sat there for a moment, letting the reality of it all sink in. It was over, and with it, a significant chapter of my life had come to a close. But in its place, a new chapter was beginning, one filled with hope and possibilities. A few days later, I received a text from Emma. "Hey, a few of us from the cooking class are getting together this weekend for a potluck. We'd love for you to join us." I smiled, feeling a spark of excitement. "Count me in," I replied. The potluck was a joyful event. We laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed each other's cooking. It reminded me of the beauty of community and the power of new connections. As the evening wound down, Emma and I found ourselves alone on the porch, the cool night air gently swirling around us. "I'm really glad you came tonight," she said softly. "Me too, Emma. This has been one of the best nights I've had in a long time," I admitted, feeling a sense of peace. "Here's to many more," she said, raising her glass with a smile. "To new beginnings," I said, clinking my glass with hers. As we gazed up at the starry sky, I felt a deep sense of peace. The journey had been tough, but it had led me to this moment, one filled with new beginnings, hope, friendship, and the promise of a brighter future. Moving on wasn't just about leaving the past behind. It was about embracing the present and looking forward to what lies ahead. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly excited about what was to come. Now, let me share a bit about my own journey. I'm a 32-year-old woman, and I've been with my boyfriend since 2022. We met through mutual friends, and we felt a strong connection right from the start. I was previously married in 2016 through an arranged marriage, but that relationship quickly turned into a nightmare. My husband was an alcoholic, abusive, and violent. Coming from a conservative family, I tried my best to make the marriage work, but when the abuse became frequent and I started fearing for my life, I knew I had to get out. I made the difficult decision to file for divorce. In my country, divorce is not only frowned upon, but the legal process is also long and arduous. In 2022, I met my ex, let's call him John. We began dating and developed strong feelings for each other. At first, John didn't know much about my past. I told him I had been in an abusive relationship, but I wasn't ready to share the full truth that I was divorced. When I finally felt comfortable enough to open up about it, John didn't take the news well. He had a strong reaction, and we stopped talking for a week. It was a painful time, but eventually, he apologized, and we got back on track. At least, that's what I thought. Even though we don't live together, we spend a lot of time together since we're in the same city. Recently, his family started asking about marriage and even suggested some potential matches for him. John told me he had talked about me to his family and assured me that everything would be fine. But just a few days ago, while we were spending a weekend together, the topic of marriage came up again. That's when he confessed something that shattered my heart. He had cheated on me during our fights. He blamed me for not giving him enough sex, for lying about my past, or for other reasons like wanting to check if everything was working properly or not finding me attractive enough. I was devastated. I had trusted him with my vulnerabilities, knowing full well how much my past abuse had scarred me. I couldn't understand why he chose to cheat instead of simply breaking up with me if he no longer wanted to be with me.